Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second of our third Friday colloquia, Essays in Music. I'm Colin McAllister, your host and curator. This series of discussions is designed to showcase a range of scholarship, highlighting the power of human inquiry and creativity. 4 times yearly on Friday afternoons, UCCS faculty and select guests present creative work and research trajectories. These presentations begin at 4 p.m. Everyone, approximately 1 hour, followed by discussion. Colloquia, Essays in Music. I'm Colin McAllister, your host and curator. This series of discussions is designed to showcase a range of scholarship, We are broadcasting live from the UCCS Downtown Center, where our talks will actually take place in person starting next fall. By commencing at 4 p.m. on a Friday, the idea is that the presentation will take you seamlessly into your Friday night happy hour, though I suspect that nowadays, many folks start their happy hour earlier. Before we get to business today, I want to announce the 2 upcoming talks in the series. Next month on Friday, 19th of March, we'll be welcoming UCCS colleague John Forshee to present on Ecoacoustics, an original composition for 10 players and electronics. And then on Friday, April 16th, Jane Rigler, another UCCS faculty member, will be presenting Audiating Ire, Sonifying My Irish Dreams. And now, without further preamble, I'd like to introduce my good friend and guest, Professor Glen Whitehead. Glen is an internationally recognized award-winning trumpet artist and composer. His creative work often explores instrumental and vocal music as immersive soundscapes, sonic theater, installation, environmental exploration, and cultural discourse in order to build compelling new interdisciplinary investigations across the arts and sciences. His most recent recording, The Living Daylights, on the PF Mentum label, received rave reviews and remained on the top 10 of radio playlists across the U.S. for over a year. In 2006, he founded the Interdisciplinary Music Program here at UCCS, where he is currently Professor of Music, as well as the co-director of the Bachelor of Innovation degree. Welcome, Glen. Good to see you.
Thank you, Colin. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here in the downtown UCCS location, downtown Colorado Springs. Got out of the house a little bit here, wandering the streets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a coordinating here back and forth between some examples, and I'm going to be running a PowerPoint. And I think
I will just mention to everyone that we are monitoring the questions in YouTube. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in there at any time. Glen will be presenting for a bit here, and then we'll go to questions right after that. So put them in the chat, and I'll be taking a look at them.
All right. Thank you. Well, let's get right down to it. I'm going to share my screen here. Watch it all come crashing down. Okay, can everybody see that? All right, I'll get right down to it here. Take it outside, people, bridging ecoacoustics and improvised music. The era of COVID-19 has profoundly shaken the foundations of many aspects of our lives. Our event venues have closed, the spaces and support systems that we depend on for delivering works of art and connecting to audiences have all been shuttered, suspended in indefinite silence. In response, musicians have turned to largely one place, the digital virtual world, struggling to compensate for the living art of music performance and practice. While the digital world has been an increasingly important collaborative interface, my impulse is to explore the opposite direction as a musician and improviser and take it outside. My goal in this talk is to bridge our applied engagement across both environmentally based sound practices and improvised music creation. I aim to connect our understanding of these fields by, 1, contextualizing environmental immersive theory and experiences found in first-person field recording as an improvisational and musical act, and 2, proposing how environmental immersive practices fuse directly into improvisational musical practice and methodologies. Even before the challenges of COVID-19, our music educational institutions have been striving to establish new theoretical systems that move us beyond the long-standing dominance of Western music ideologies. The research from this talk will also appear in an article of the same name in the Journal of Critical Improvisation Studies out of the University of Guelph next month. Listening-based immersive participation is at the center of the fields of ecoacoustics and soundscape ecology. These practices often involve multi-sensational acts of listening and responding in natural environments through sound. Meanwhile, the field of critical improvisation has expanded to connect to a tapestry of multidisciplinary inquiries, culminating with George Lewis's and Benjamin Picot's 2-volume Handbook of Critical Improvisation Studies, with contributions from scholars, practitioners, and artists from such fields as architecture, anthropology, art history, computer science, cognitive science, cultural studies, dance, ethnomusicology, film, gender studies, and the list goes on. I postulate that a shared fundamental human taskscape, a term borrowed from anthropology, that is simultaneously improvisational and musical, lies deep within the behavior systems inherent to both improvised music and environmentally based sound practices. Both of these fields are imbued with methodologies for engaging with interactive dynamics in uncanny serendipity or the unexpected event in a shared time and space. Both explore the relationships between the observer and sound. Both center on the experience of and study around the present or passing moment as the primary place of research and creation systems. Improvised music is far too vast in scope to pinpoint without explanation. Here, I am referring generally to the practice understood largely as free improvisation. While attempts at unified definitions of free improvisation have articulated a broader understood canon, this opaque musical arena as a whole is resistant to ontological essentialism and defined more for its diversity of approaches and perspectives than as one genre in of itself. This elasticity makes it possible to merge with a similarly malleable arena of environmental engagements. In the past few decades, environmentally based sound practices, including the interrelated tapestry of fields such as acoustic ecology, ecoacoustics, and soundscape ecology, have become increasingly interdisciplinary. Beyond artistic arenas, the practitioners of these fields have drawn connections to a range of disciplines such as biology, geography, ecology, climate change studies, architecture, and even city planning, to name a few. In that sense, on the artistic side, this essay builds upon the pioneering work of Pierre Schaeffer, Pauline Oliveros, Hildegard Westerkamp, Barry Truax, N.A. Lockwood, among others, as well as more recent contributions by Matthew Bertner, Leah Barclay, Francisco Lopez, Andrea Poli, Viv Corringham, and more, who identify field recording or sonification as part of their artistic practice. The artistic frame of first-person field recording, common across many environmental sound practices, has also become its own kind of canon. Similarly, the performer-composer, practitioner-as-artist approach conjoins quite gracefully, ripe with possibilities to connect to environmental approaches and compositional practices. However, despite the rapid expansion of these activities in the past decade or two, environmentally based sound and music composition practices remain largely disconnected from improvised music. Such ideas first came to light for me from my first experiences in field recording. I have found remarkably similar experiences between improvised music practices and field recording activities. Bringing them together through an examination of their shared theoretical underpinnings may reveal how they can be reconciled as intuitively linked. The many references to environment in this article can take place virtually anywhere outside. Environmental sound study activities across artistic, scientific, and humanistic fields permeate just about every conceivable type of location, from rural to urban, from deep wilderness to outside the urban front door. However, one cannot be offering new ideas into the musical canon, particularly when implying the anthrosphere, geography, space, and location without questions of access, equity, opportunity, and diversity close behind. Therefore, I will keep the references to environment relatively general, except when referring to specific locations and situations from my own experience. One of the characteristics of musical improvisation on which many of my ideas hinge is that process is at the core of much of improvised music methodology, particularly as it is conjoined with a promise of an unforeseeable outcome. Similarly, in environmental immersive practices, the reliance on an understood time-based process within the random interplay of nature is paramount. The experience of embodied listening is the overarching behavior that enables any of these ideas to flourish, particularly when approached through lenses of both improvisational music methodologies and environmental immersive practices. It is listening now where I will begin. As the COVID-19 pandemic has stripped away the fundamental ability for people to make music together face-to-face, this new reality has also revealed the profound opportunities of listening as musicking. V.J. Iyer has theorized recently that listening embodies similar behavioral and critical systems as musical improvisation. In short, listening is an act of improvisation, particularly when listening is in the context of live improvised music. Iyer explains that, quote, "The experience of listening to music that is understood to be improvised differs significantly from listening knowingly to composed music. The main source of drama in improvised music is the sheer fact of the shared sense of time, the sense that the improviser is working, creating, generating musical material in the same time in which we are co-performing as listeners," end quote. I build on Iyer's concept of the listener as co-performer, especially in the improvised musical context. Using this definition, I offer that the act of listening and decision-making inherent in environmental immersive activities represents a similar musicking experience. Otherwise stated, applied environmentally based sound work positions the listener as improviser and co-performer when framed in a methodology of immersive improvisation. The search for interesting environmental interactive sonic phenomena entails critical real-time decisions and hence is an improvisational endeavor. Moreover, the act of field recording as the embodiment of such immersive environmental listening engages intimately with the improvisation of living systems. Soundscape ecology strives to reconcile sonic interactivity, subjective perceptions, and empirical data across anthrophonies, biophonies, and geophonies into a complete holistic picture. This framing of the subjective and empirical can be seen in core concepts of these fields that can also resonate uniquely as musical and improvisational ideas. These ideas can be reframed into a broader tapestry to offer new ideas for a music theory for improvisation. For instance, in soundscape studies, a term called the soundtope is the acoustic result of vocalizing animals and living things in a shared geography, from its minimum to maximum scale. From the platform of the soundtope, the sonotope is the total scope of overlap and impact of all possible sounds and sources. The term ecotone, however, is perhaps most meaningful if recast in an improvisational frame. The result refers to spaces within the environment where biodiversity interacts most intensely, where actions and decisions of living systems may come with the highest consequences. At the heart of an ecotone is a focused geographical intensity defined as the edge effect. As Farina explains, at the ecotones, many processes find a strong constraint called the edge effect. The edge effect is in most cases, enhances biodiversity, but also other processes such as predation. Ecotones are also considered ecological traps or sink areas in which species attracted by their structure and food abundance experience a higher predatory pressure or habitat disturbance. It is reasonable to consider that as for vegetation and animal distribution, ecotones exist also for other phenomena such as the sonic environment, end quote. Here is an example of just such a center encountered on a concert tour and residency trip to Australia 2 years ago. In Tasmania, I recorded the sounds of 2 Tasmanian devils fighting over a piece of food, which was some kind of animal carcass. And go ahead and play that. Play that. So, similarly, in his foundational writing on improvisation, George Lewis links the elements of listening, doing, surprise, indeterminacy, place, space, and intentionality. Lewis builds on Pierre Bourdieu's notion of habitus, the general definition of which comprises socially ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions. It is the way that individuals perceive the social world around them and to react to it. One element of this is through imitation or mimesis and through improvisation, which Bourdieu describes as the durably installed generative principle of regulated improvisation. Lewis explains, following Bourdieu, I want to sketch in outline form some characteristics of an emerging new definition of improvisation. First, one imagines that such a definition would be receptive to both production, doing, and reception, listening. Or rather, would view listening as a form of doing, end quote. Similar to Vijay's idea, this concept suggests that the improvisation of listening and reception as an embodied immersive experience that would also imply the notion of transduction through the immersion of both doing and reception. The idea of transduction here, lifting off of Lewis's notion of habitus, situates the environmental immersive experience itself as a holistic act of transductive improvisation. Quote, the human body can be, as Julian Henrique states in his work on transduction of musical performance, quote, the human body can be considered a sensory transducer and experiencing the transformation of sonic energy to kinetic energy, end quote. Paul de Assis, composer, cultural scholar at the Orpheus Institute, explains a similar idea. He states, quote, the main transducer interface, however, is a human body, notating a score, playing an instrument, vibrating vocal cords, a complex living organism inhabited by diverse layers of information and by innumerable drives, which, working together, shape the actual rendering of musical events, end quote. I would argue there is a core connection between this transductive process from what occurs and what one experiences, listening and doing, both in the field as a sound practitioner and the production of an embodied experience of free improvisation. A related concept, haecity, is used here to bring more focus to the importance of the ever-present moment of time of improvisation. In the processes of both performance and environmental immersion, this idea, haecity, embodies a philosophy of the essence of a thing. It explains qualities that make something this. Haecity is a concept repurposed here, identifies the time-centered element within human transductive processes as a thing unto which it speaks to the physical, molecular movements within the singularity of events in time. Assis explains how haecity, quote, dramatizes space-time itself, curving it, folding it, giving it transient form and temporal structure. Coincidentally, this concept also resonates with key terminologies in soundscape ecology, as explained above, such as the soundtope, sonotone, and ecotone. referring to the zone of the interlacing phenomena where direct interaction takes place in the natural world at a given moment in time. Assis offers an angle on the idea of haestety applied specifically to the performing arts, called micro-haesteties. He explains, quote, when appropriating this terminology for the performing arts, music, dance, theater, or performance, I propose the introduction of the notion of microhaestety, collapsing the experience of an infinitesimal fraction of a second. End quote. This concept is useful to flesh out the idea of the performer and sound artist as transducer. As he continues, quote, microhaesteties are high energy loaded and high speed moving singularities that carry a force of potential from one position to the next. They make up the visible or audible part of artistic transductive processes. Again, there is a similar idea in soundscape ecology that drills down to this singular moment, the edge effect. Here we see the connections between environmentally based sound practices and improvisation rooted in their shared approaches of listening and generating. We interact in microhaesteties. In both contexts, there is no time for contemplation. Things must happen in the unavoidable urgency, an imperative sequentially of the here and now, end quote. Ideas of such possible connections first sparked for me during the 2012 Ecosono Institute in Alaska, directed by Alaskan composer Matthew Bertner. Bertner's approach was the first I encountered to combine comprehensively science, climate studies, technology, composition, as well as the unique immersion of human musical performance and improvisation. While much of the work placed field recording and technology at the center of ecoacoustic activities, Bertner purposely marginalized technology theoretically, deeming it less significant when compared to the human experience. In Bertner's approach, technology was peripheral, even if it was a central tool, to the more central purposes of engagement, experience, and embodiment. Bertner explains this approach. Quote, another formative concept of ecosono is the purpose of outdoor recording is not the acquisition of material samples, but to hear the world and learn from it. The aesthetic described here de-emphasizes sampling and soundscape composition and environmental sound artworks. A desire for human environment collaborative work drives this tendency. Interactive ecoacoustics is about a real-time sound-based engagement with the natural world more than an attempt to record it. Human environment computer interactive art positions the human as an agent of change rather than a passive observer, end quote. The challenge of decentering technology is even more important now in our current pandemic circumstances. As COVID-19 social distancing protocols have centered technological immersion in our lives, it is even more important to be mindful to contextualize technology deliberately, even if it is a core tool. Bertner's framing of a decidedly conscious choice to decenter technology from the experience while still utilizing technology in an out-of-doors into nature improvisational immersive practice offers a conceptual buffer to an increasingly technology-centered pandemic reality. Such ideas will undoubtedly be needed to connect in deeper ways to the earth, nature, to empower ourselves to own the anthropony's profound impact on nature and each other in a post-COVID-19 era. The immersive experiences of environmental sonic discovery and ecosono were familiar to me because they mirrored, in my experience, being inside an improvised musical creation experience. The conscious recognition opened my senses, and through many following environmental sonic adventures led to one serendipitous experience after another, much like the serendipity one can experience inside an ensemble engaged in free improvisation. Almost from the outset, this new branch of music creation expanded my musical vocabulary as a trumpet artist in ways I didn't expect, and immediately, in ongoing practice, connected my field experiences with instrumental music creation in improvised context. One such example is from my recent CD, Living Daylights. This trio recorded involved longtime collaborator and online UCCS faculty member, bassist pianist Scott Walton, and UCCS alumnus drummer Britt Kayampa. The description of this work is as follows. The Living Daylights is based on natural phenomena that play with our perceptions of space, time, and place, and rendered with a loosely structured improvisational system that enables many possibilities within the natural restraints of a conscious system. The piece I'm going to play for you is called 42 Degrees. 42 Degrees references the connection of people and light reflected in the observations of, well, rainbows. When we see a rainbow and its band of colors, we are looking at light refracted and reflected from different raindrops at an angle between 40 and 42 degrees at all points of view, whether one person is high on a hilltop and another hundreds of feet below. Light orients to our visual senses, our lenses orient the angle of light. And go ahead and play that example, please, Bradley. Specifically, you'll notice that the melodic line is constructed for its momentum to be driven by a sense of wind-sweeping, churning, changing timbre, connecting the idea of a rainbow to wind, weather, and expanse. Unlike so much of what we conceive in music as having a single identity of sound, in nature, sound in nature is almost always a moving, shifting palette of evolving layers of timbre. As the description of this CD implies, the nature of collective participation in music creation through improvisation is paramount. Part of this methodology resonates with ideas such as self-organizing systems and nonlinear systems. David Borgo offers succinct ideas on the impact of SOSs as an improvisatory system. Quote, they, SOSs, self-organizing systems, are most often comprised of numerous individual agents that are autonomous, but also exhibit a high degree of interconnectivity. He continues, SOSs are also inherently uncontrollable. One result that resonates with this was from my Alaska experience, was the creation of my first ecoacoustic improvisational piece out of field recordings from one extraordinary day on Stewart Bay, Alaska, with humpback whales bubble net feeding. And the piece that I created from this experience is entitled Mysticetti. I've consequently performed this in other pieces, including Sands That Move, based on the Great Sand Dunes National Park, with Matthew Bertner and the Ecosono Ensemble, and in concerts as parts of tours of Australia, California, several conferences and festivals across the US and Canada. I also performed these with other performers on a month-long tour of Europe in spring 2019. This piece, Mysticetti, was also published along with several other pieces created from Ecosono Institute experiences in the International Journal of Computer Music. Go ahead and play that track. Thank you. Real-time environmental immersive experiences are encoded with improvisation and body engagement with the unknown or unexpected. In both contexts, I am responding to the anticipated and unanticipated, to the real and imagined dynamics just about to happen. Any in-the-moment or present moment encounter resides at the intersection of multiple fields of play, where the surprise of an encounter is a portal to multidisciplinary connectivity. As David Borgo states in Sink or Swarm, in his book Sink or Swarm, although much does still separate the sciences from the humanities, and some separation may always be important, the emergence of a third culture that would improve the communication between the two seems to be both imminent and eminently desirable, at a moment in which our very ideas of order and disorder are being reconfigured and revalued in dramatic ways. I believe the methods and findings of the new sciences of surprise are useful in illuminating the dynamics and aesthetics of musical improvisation. The natural world is filled with examples of species that operate in a collective fashion that defy a top-down or centralized chain of command. For me, this science of surprise echoes the waking moment, the moment of impact, the reactive split-second response that I experience both as an improviser and as an environmentally based sound artist. These moments are the points of both arrival and departure of intersecting events that are then incorporated into our critical experiences. These moments represent the full embodiment of experiential discovery within real-time experience. Through environmental immersive activities, the link to improvisation as an inherent human attribute connected to imagination, awareness, and anticipation becomes clearer. To further contextualize these connections, according to musicologist Gary Tomlinson, a reorientation of the development of the human mind, which advanced the species, became uniquely from a phenomenon, quote, a phenomenon that in human experience seems to underlie our general capacity to attend to and correlate sequence of events around us, end quote. Human beings long ago developed the consciousness to think at a distance. That leap embodied a, quote, release from proximity, whereby humans gradually gain the capacity to imagine things not present to the senses. Tomlinson puts the ability that developed into musicking as the point of genesis for these remarkable evolutionary developments. As the free improvisation pioneer Derek Bailey from England postulates, quote, mankind's first musical performance couldn't have been anything but an improvisation. Certainly, these early human improvisations must be contextualized within the spaces and places of their natural environment, as well as within communities of both human and non-human species. Clarinetist, improviser, and environmental researcher David Rothenberg has developed a unique environmental practice, improvising with various animal communities across the globe, including birds, whales, wolves, and more. Rothenberg is unique in articulating the most direct improvisational dialogue with non-humans, raising the question of intention, intervention, awareness, and consciousness. He asserts that, quote, even a tiny bird can be attuned to the magic of organized sound, where the form might be greater than the function, beauty ever resonant and present, long before we were able to learn from its ways and hear the opposite of time, end quote. Just as in my experience with the whales in Alaska, Rothenberg embraces full immersion in search and discovery process, open to serendipity awareness in the moment, anticipation and coincidence with natural agents moving and participating in an improvising community. In his chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Critical Improvisation Studies, Rothenberg writes, quote, interspecies improvisation 101 should be a sanctioned part of our music education system. First, learn to listen. Pick up on the structure and inflection of the sound animals are making. Take it in as an unknown musical world, and take it seriously by preparing yourself to join in, end quote. Improvisation, ecoacoustics, soundscape ecology, and all the intersecting fields discussed here manifest diverse ideas of a larger, interconnected, deeply embodied community, which includes all stakeholders involved in spaces and places. This notion of the interconnected community enables us to see how environmentally based sound practice and improvisation are methodologically connected through shared spaces, the acts of listening, doing, and interacting, in the time frame of the present moment. The onset of COVID has resulted in previously unforeseen unique opportunities to expand both virtual and outdoor musical practices into new communities. In turn, these experiences helped accelerate the development of some of the ideas in this article. For instance, in June 2020, I participated in the West Bend residency. Situated 2 hours east of Toronto, the West Bend Composer-Performer residency articulates a collaborative creative vision in what would usually be an immersive experience with the surrounding natural world of the residency location. However, like so many situations, this residency also went virtual due to the pandemic. Working with vocalist-composer A.P. Bergeron from Quebec, guitarist Spencer Friedman from Queens, New York, percussionist Gordon Fry from Nichols, Florida, we created a project utilizing concepts of environmental improvisation. As explained in the project description, this composition was created through a process of environmental improvisation and field recordings. Each member contributed material from explorations of their local geographies, contemplating serendipity, scale, proximity, and distance between themselves, their surrounding, and each other. This resulted in the composition entitled Sure. Go ahead and play that, please, Bradley. In fall 2020, I also put some of the ideas in this article to test with 2 outdoor concerts under the theme "Take It Outside, People" in the Peak Frequency concert series offered in the music program at UCCS. The first featured the Colorado Springs-based Armeo Dance Company, Denver-based improvisation ensemble, the Bottesini Project, and included a new composition by composer UCCS visiting assistant professor Dr. John Forshee titled Anti-Borderlands that utilized a semaphore flag signal system. The second concert featured the then brand new UCCS Symphony that I direct, improvising through the natural environment at the Heller Center for the Arts and performing Pauline Oliveros' Four Meditations for Orchestra. I couldn't resist including a photo of Pauline Oliveros, of us with Pauline Oliveros when she was with us several years ago in residency, thanks to my good colleague, Dr. Jane Rigler, who brought her here. Go ahead and play the video. Thanks, Bradley.
Thank you.
As you can see, these broader eco-improvisational methodologies can be quite useful. In 2019, I did a solo concert and residency tour across 4 European countries, England, Ireland, Switzerland, and France. As usual, I included as many field trips as I could in my favorite combination of activities in such a trip. Traveling and concertizing to new places, sprinkled with environmental sonic exploration. These are just a few little photos from concerts. From these trips, did a lot of field recording, and I'm preparing a new piece, new CD from some of those experiences. Here's an excerpt of 2 brief excerpts of 2 new pieces. One from one of the most violently windy days I have ever experienced on top of a plateau in southern France. And the other, one of birds near the summit of Ireland's highest mountain, all of 3,000 feet. Go ahead and play those 2, Bradley. Thank you. Acknowledging the listener as improviser, immersed along with a living dynamic environment, receptive and responsive to earthly events, is an embodiment of empathy. At heart, this comprehensive approach is a call to explore empathy as a deeper, long-term methodology. In the age of COVID-19, climate crisis, and earnest calls for systemic changes for social and racial justice, It is crucial that activism as a proactive force be understood and recognized as multidimensional and heterogeneous, with frames of knowledge coming from a myriad of orientations to the world. Why is it important to acknowledge improvisational processes into environmental music-making systems and cultures? George Lipsitz provides a larger answer of the essence of improvisation as a cultural attribute, writing that, quote, "Improvisation appeals to us because it is work that makes a difference in the world. It compels us to leave our comfort zones, to forge meaningful interactions with others across categories and social identities, to deepen the democratic strata of society through cultural activities that resonate fully with the contradictions and possibilities of our time. Improvisation in both expressive, cultural, and social movement mobilizations can keep us attentive to our responsibility to build the world we hope to inhabit." Guitarist and free improvisation pioneer Derek Bailey's assertion that a good improvisation is a celebration of the moment, quote unquote, succinctly sums up the improvisational experiences of both music creation and environmental field practices, reminiscent also of the idea of microhacities. In this moment of mask-wearing, social distancing, and concern about enclosed spaces, I urge you to celebrate the moment and take it outside, people. Hopefully, we will also have plenty to celebrate post-COVID-19, particularly if we can build on the new challenges and opportunities in front of us and push ourselves to expand our horizons. This is my bibliography. If anyone wants to see this or would like to see it, I'm happy to send it to anybody. Just send me an email. Thank you so much for listening and being here today. Thank you very much. And any questions? Dr. McAllister?
Fantastic. That's really great to hear you. Can you hear me all right over there, Glenn? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. It's great to see some comments here. One of our students, Connor Borgel, actually said that he's sitting by the creek in Manitou listening to this. And so nice. That's really giving him a great surround sound presentation. So yes, please feel free. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to kind of monitor the comments here in the chat. If anyone has any questions for Glen. Glen, I'll start off with one for you. You've had the opportunity to travel to so many places and make this kind of music in a lot of different environments. What do you see, like, because you live here in Colorado Springs in this beautiful environment, the Heller Center with Pikes Peak and so forth, do you notice a difference between the way you approach things based on specifically where you come from, say, based to somebody who's been living in Manhattan for 20 years?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the big discrepancies in this sort of field situation is you have to, you know, it certainly helps to be in this environment, in this climate of Colorado. And absolutely, I would be, you know, I would definitely been influenced by, you know, being here in this regard. You just can't help but be gravitated to the outdoors and to draw connections aesthetically and holistically between our experiences and, you know, the privilege of being able to be right in the mountains here. And of course, you know, that's one of the qualifiers too. You know, a lot of people don't have that kind of access. And people living in urban settings or, you know, impoverished areas or areas that aren't so, that when it lends itself to that, have a very different kind of, you know, setting experience for that. It's one of the aspects of the field that's kind of odd in some respects. And in fact, you know, in sound studies and soundscape studies, it is coming to the attention of, you know, the scholars, it is being brought up that it is actually needs to pay more attention to underrepresented portions of the population and environments.
Yeah, I think I know that both of us have a real affinity for the Heller Center here, and I think you've done so much great music making over there. I was so happy to be able to conduct that concert of John Forshe's piece in the fall, and I think back to also Matthew Bertner's concerto that was written right. for you and that we did a few years ago. And I hope we continue to use that space. We actually had a couple questions coming in here, including some very nice comments, including a question from our new dean, Dr. Lynn Vidler. Lynn, thank you for this. So I will ask you, Glenn, this is coming from Lynn. Speaking of empathizing with diverse space, times, species, environments, which locations have placed you most outside of your comfort zone? And then where would you like to go next to push those boundaries?
Wow, that's a really good question. To think about that for a second. Well, I do strive to push myself to go to places that are outside of my comfort zone, that spirit of adventure, of exploration. And particularly when you're looking for sonic events and real things and you have a field recorder in your hand, it takes on a whole kind of new, exciting aspect of the adventure. Tasmania, I think, was probably where I felt most out of my element when I was literally walking through, a really dense forest and encountering just a completely, very, very old forest. This is some of the oldest forests on the planet that is still there. And so that was one, especially encountering the Tasmanian devils, which was pretty crazy because it happened rather suddenly, and I had earphones, I had headphones, and I'm listening to the world through a field recorder. Let me see, Scotland, in my trip to Europe, when I took that hike up the tallest mountain in Ireland by myself. That was I felt particularly alone in that setting. It was cold, it was raining, and, I was by myself, and nobody knew where I was. So that was a particularly interesting environment. And, your experiences in that place, in that setting, become heightened. And it feels like there is a connection and an interaction happening with the animal world and the natural world in a different level. I mean, it's probably just imagination, but it's nice to experience it anyways.
Yeah, definitely. Jane Rigler also has a question for you. Expanding upon your idea, we've been talking here about pushing boundaries. And this is a question I had as well. How might you encourage others to explore improvisation in their lives, particularly maybe people who are more novices in this area? How would you get them started?
Well, I guess that's a great question, Jane. If you're talking about music, like improvising in music, the really great thing about free improvisation is that anybody can do it. And that I think that if they're just open, if the door is open for them just a little bit, and they're led into some basic kind of exercises or behaviors of play, sonically, as an ensemble basis, it's extremely interesting and it's extremely inspiring. And you can approach it in so many different ways. If you're talking about in sort of environmental improvisation, we have a lot of our students, just go out and buy a Tascam recorder. And when you actually have a device in your hand, it takes on a different kind of mode. It takes on a different kind of context. You become an explorer in that situation. And you put on headphones. You don't have to put on the headphones. You can just be recording the interesting things that you hear, but you're searching around the world in a different way, even different than when you're just going on a hike. I mean, it's kind of like it's a tool. It's kind of a cyborg, and it's an instrument. The field recorder. It's an interesting concept to think of the field recorder as an instrument, as a musical instrument. And when you put the headphones on and turn on the record button, turn up the volume, you hear the world in a different way. It's immersive dimensions. The proximity of every space is gone, and things are louder. And you can explore that way. So you can go back and forth in that way. So that alone, I think, changes your orientation to being outside, to exploring nature, or even in urban environments.
Yeah, I remember when Raven Chacon was here a couple years ago, he gave me this record that he had done of this recording in a very remote place that was very quiet, but everything was turned up so loud that, of course, it was very loud. And I would have never had any idea what I was listening to if he hadn't explained it to me. I wanted to ask you, so, you and I, for instance, we did a climb up the back of Pikes Peak this summer, and you didn't have your trumpet with you. You didn't have a recorder with you. We were just slogging on this hike. Has your practice changed just how you listen, even in situations where you've got the work part of your brain or the creative part of your brain maybe turned off?
Yeah. Yes, in fact, it has. And I notice that very consciously now about how I really enjoy the outside experience. Certainly, I think before I really started this work compared to now, I'm very conscious of, much more conscious of every little sound around me. I never put on earbuds and listen to music when I'm out for a run or even on a very, very long hike. I did a solo hike. That was a really, really cool trip up Pikes Peak, by the way. That was really a fun experience. And you start to really do notice that you are there in the environment, like you are a part of the profound space of that location, and everything knows you're there. Every animal, every bird, even insects, of course, they know you're there, and they're interacting with you, in different ways. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat, the idea of how I think improvisation is a centering thing and creates more mindfulness and the ability to live in the present. Mostly what I do is not improvisation. Most of what I do is preparing a piece for a future performance. And I think about that sometimes. It's like, well, when I'm practicing, of course I'm trying to be in the present, but I'm thinking about what that future end result can be. And I think improvisation can be very liberating in a different way because you can really become center focused. And really mindful of what's happening. I think that's wonderful. Jane said she appreciates that you answered her question by inviting people to listen to their world, and that it's like we become new when we become in tune with our environment.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is really great. Hey, can we take a little turn here, because you brought up some experiences that you've had in the COVID period, and when, of course, for most of us, music making was drastically curtailed. All of these models that we had used and counted on for years, all of a sudden are just like the rugs pulled out from under us. What do you see as maybe new creative directions that musicians are going to take after this COVID experience? Can you shed any light? Is there some new directions you see, or new ways to use this kind of technology that we're using now in a more creative way?
Certainly. A lot of focus is going on, the possibilities of the virtual world, of course, and that's going to continue. I think that will probably continue in much greater ways than before COVID, even after everything is back to normal, whenever that might be, even completely normal. At the same time, I didn't grab onto it as much as other people did. I've done a fair amount of virtual, playing and interacting, and certainly in the right context, the right project, it's wonderful. And I mean, with the West Bend was all virtual, of course, and we did real-time things. But what I do feel is that I think the concert world the in-person concert world is going to expand in different directions as far as the ideas of what it entails a concert is, into different places, into different settings, and exploring different venues. The idea of what a concert venue, concert hall is going to be far beyond a concert hall or a club. And in my experience, those already were some of the most interesting concerts to participate in found places and site-specific locations. House concerts, I think, are going to become a much bigger thing. They're already, of course, pre-COVID. You know, the house concert scene in different genres and different elements. I don't think people realize how much is happening there. There are whole circuits. We have an alumnus who is making a living concertizing in almost exclusively house concerts. For instance, a student from very early on. And so, yeah, I think it will expand, hopefully in really good, productive ways, and hopefully in ways that will enable musicians to, you know, have greater money-making possibilities is really important as well.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like now that we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, maybe some of the really creative uses of this kind of technology are going to start coming to the fore.
Yeah.
I think, well, at least for myself, I think when COVID first started, everybody was like, oh, we just have to stop, right?
Yeah.
We have to stop doing things for a while. And then there's also the sense maybe of, boy, I've been on Zoom meetings all day. Do I really want to go to a Zoom concert tonight? Yeah. That's happened to me personally. I'm sure it's happened to you too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so maybe after this is all said and done, now we're going to start to see a creative combination of live activities, things that we could do before with the utilization of this kind of technology. I mean, I know, of course, telematics has been around for a long time, but maybe we'll start to see even more creative music-making processes.
And I think the technology is going to get better and better very quickly. I mean, I think within a few years, we're going to have very high, they already do have it, but it's going to be much more accessible, and more institutions and more people are going to be able to, you know, to get the technology and the instruments that they need to do really high-end work there, and with great sound quality and great video, and et cetera.
One of our students, Landon Lucero, made a comment here. He says, the digital art world that is now backed by the blockchain is really interesting stuff right now.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Landon. So Glenn, what's next then? Like, forecast for us, you know, look down, look at the next, I don't know, few years in your life. Where are you going to take this creative practice, these scholarly ideas, this real interest in collaborating across disciplines? Where do you think it's going to go?
Oh, you know, like everyone else, I've been imagining and wanderlusting about, you know, wow, I could get on a plane someday. But I've had some plans for a while for the next stage of this, particularly in New Zealand, where I have some very close friends, colleagues who were here from the Group Y, kept in close touch with them and talking about, you know, a bigger, larger project, you know, hopefully going there with some big grant. I would like to connect more with communities that maybe aren't so typical to you know, for us in some ways, and expand in those directions. Let me see. You know, also, you know, I'm making a CD right now that's going rather slowly. I thought I would get so much more work done on it during COVID, but it's just going slowly, based on the work I did in these trips, and certainly the Europe trip. I'd just like to keep expanding and finding more people to collaborate with as well. I'd like to find more concertizing experiences and actually get the technology better, or you know, where you know, utilizing the laptop for field recordings and processing and all of that becomes a little more seamless. Sometimes it can still feel like it's a clunky machine, And, you know, when you're focused on it so much, you know, during periods when I am focused on it so much, it is really nice to just put it away and play, you know, and just be a musician. You know, it's been such a long time where I haven't performed with, you know, people. The Europe trip was so enlightening because I played with so many different people. That was the first trip I did like that, where I was solo and I put together all the concerts, many of which with musicians I never met before. And I absolutely loved that kind of complete improvisational approach. And every concert was fantastic. I mean, maybe the audience didn't think it was fantastic, but I thought my experience was fantastic, you know. And I loved waking up, traveling somewhere, and knowing I was going to do a concert that night with people I never met before. I felt like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing, you know, for a limited time. And after about a month, then it's time to go home.
Right. Your family needs you back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I talk to my students about in the terms of jazz. You know, it's the same thing. If you know a bunch of jazz standards, you can also go to any city anywhere in the world and sit down with people that you've never met and play a gig that night. Yeah. And it could be really interesting, that shared commonality, like you're talking about, love for the environment and love of improvisation. Mm-hmm. John Forsey says that, oh, and I remember this too, John. Yeah. John says that you, Glenn, once mentioned how just as in the 20th century, we're now coming out of COVID and headed into the roaring 20s. Yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I agree with that, John.
Yeah. I'm telling students, I'm really trying to encourage our students to really have not only hope, but be excited, because they're, you know, it's quite possible that they're at the perfect, they're in a perfect place in their early 20s, you know, and at the heels of this pandemic, there's going to be some kind of artistic renaissance, you know, I mean, music and in all ways, and probably in all forms of art, and partly in the way that happened from the last pandemic, which wasn't exclusively about that, but was a big part of it as well. The Roaring 20s was a real thing, you know, that really rocketed the music world into a whole different place on many fronts.
Yeah. Definitely. I just got a comment from another Whitehead. This might be a relation of yours, Glenn, I think. Jack Whitehead asks, how would you introduce these kinds of concepts at the junior high school level? Putting you on the spot here.
Dad. That's my dad. Thanks, Dad. I'm glad you're listening. That's a really good question. We're talking about music education, you know, in our program, and you know, and the need, and sometimes the real dire need, to expand the canon in music education. I think it's perfect. It's not only, teaching field recording and environmental improvisation, either on instruments, you know, or anything else, but it's also the kind of activity that can expand to any student. Not just students in band, not just students in choir, and, you know, have a music creation scenario educationally that is available to all students, you know, as a core subject, as a core class. You know, there's so much they can learn, not only about music and music creation and music performance, but you can integrate it right into environmentalism, into climate change, into biology, into anything to do with the natural world with a simple field recorder.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I hope your dad is satisfied with that answer. You might have to take it up with him later. Well, I think on that optimistic note of us coming out into a new roaring 20s, maybe that's a good sign to wrap up our discussion this evening and move on into the weekend. I want to thank you for being here, Glenn. This was really a great talk, and I have to go back and check out some of those terms. You can use you pointed out some new terminology I'm not familiar with.
Yeah,
I'm going to go back and take a look.
There's going to be a new initiative in our faculty, and I'm going to be testing you all on these terminologies, and we're going to be developing a new music theory to put into our music theory curriculum. So
we got to get on it. All right. We have our homework cut out for us this weekend. Thank you to all of you who listened in. We had students, we had faculty, we had Dean Vidler with us today. I want to give a special shout out to the man behind the scenes here. Bradley Plez is the man who has been putting this all together, who played those recordings, and who made this thing run seamlessly. Doing a Teams call to YouTube is still not as easy as many people may think. So Bradley, thank you so much for being here. I also want to give a shout out to our UCCS Downtown crew, Stephanie Adams and Margie Oldham, who helped put this thing together. I want to thank the VAPA department for sponsoring the Third Friday Colloquia series. And we will see you all on March 19th with John Forsheep.
All right.
Thanks again, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure.
Have a great night.
Take care. Have a good weekend.